Having the right equipment for surveillance for a PI is a necessity for many reasons. First thing you need to prepare for your surveillance is a cover sheet. I know many people don't use these anymore, or they don't print them out if they have access to information on their phone. However, I always print mine out as I run into situations many times out in the country, in the mountains, a parking garage, or I just have a weak cell signal where I can't access things electronically. Also, if I need to reference it quickly while driving, I can grab a piece of paper off of the passenger seat a lot easier and safer than fumbling through my cell phone trying to find it. A basic cover sheet that I use looks something like this. It has the subject's name, photos, address, vehicle description with license plate in large bold letters so I can easily find it, basic case information, and my company information in the header. Pen and paper is another absolute necessity for a surveillance investigator. Some investigators use their phones, but again, in the rush of events during surveillance, it is a lot faster to grab a paper and a pencil and jot down a license plate or an address or other vital pieces of information than find something on your phone. A cell phone is vital these days for surveillance for many reasons, though. Number one, it is your lifeline out there, folks. If something goes wrong, you need to be able to call for assistance quickly. You also may need to pre-text a subject, call a client, run some searches on databases, the internet, or social media. Most PIs don't use a regular GPS any longer. However, I still have one in my car. There are a couple of reasons for having this as a backup for the GPS on your phone. When you get into remote areas, such as up in the mountains or out in the country, if you lose phone signal or if it gets too weak, you will lose GPS capability on your cell phone. If you have a separate GPS unit, it will usually still work. This video is sponsored by OREP Insurance and Working PI Magazine. OREP is a leading provider of private investigator liability insurance. Visit orep.org for a quote today. I also like having it in the event I need to be utilizing my phone for other things. Binoculars are another must-have for surveillance. I don't use mine very often, but when I need them, folks, I really need them, and they can be a case saver. These are great for rural cases and other cases where you need to watch a subject at a distance. Sure, you may have great zoom on your camera, but nothing can replace the control and the vision ability like a good pair of binoculars. You don't need to get really expensive ones either. A good basic pair will be fine as long as it is durable enough. Durability is a key for all of your surveillance equipment. It all gets tossed around, jostled around, and, well, misused. So make sure your equipment is made of good, durable material. A flashlight is another must-have. Again, nothing super fancy. I carry a couple of those little promotional flashlights around in my car that I've received at trade shows. They usually have a good battery life, and the LED ones put off plenty of light. This is another one of those pieces of equipment that you don't need often, but when you do need it, folks, you simply need one. Again, I know you may have one on your phone, but many times having a separate one that's not as bright as the one on your phone, is necessary. I find myself using them to find other pieces of equipment in the dark in my vehicle, as well when I'm on foot surveillance to, well, look at license plate numbers and addresses. Window shades, another vital piece of equipment that you need. Good window coverings are a necessity. At the minimum, sun shield for the windshield is needed. This can be used to help block the sunlight, keep you more concealed, as well keep you cool on those really hot days. You are going to need a good video camera, folks. This does not have to be super fancy, but it has to be durable and have certain features that you will need for surveillance. Now, let's look at those specs. First, you want 1080p at least, not 1080i, but 1080p. Some PIs use 4K, and that's great, but 4K makes much larger video files. We're not trying to get Hollywood-style videography out there. We just need good, clear video evidence, and 1080p works fine. The problem we usually see when investigators use 4K is related to the size of the video file that they need to upload. Then the client has to download it. My camera also has 50x optical zoom and 500x digital zoom, but you never want to use digital zoom while shooting video for surveillance. Digital is a lot lower quality product where optical is natural, like zooming in with binoculars or a telescope. The flip out screen on my camera is also fully reversible, so I can flip it out, spin it around, and then I can close it with the screen pointing out so I can shoot sideways and still watch the video. It's also a 2.7-inch touchscreen, so it's easy to see and easy to control. Another great feature it has is night vision. However, most cameras these days, they do not call it night vision. This camera calls it low light, and it has an auto feature that I use. It changes it automatically in low light situations. Now, don't expect these type of cameras to give you night vision like the military or the police or James Bond have. They are usually good enough, though, to tell what's going on and be able to tell who is who in the video. Date and timestamp is another must-have feature you need for your video camera. Most cameras have this. It puts the date and the time in the metadata for the video file. Then you can use special software like Investigation Video Editor that will pull this video and place the time and date stamp in the video for you so it is visually part of the video. Besides a primary camera, every great surveillance investigator has a backup camera. What, you say? Yes, yep. You need to invest in a good backup camera just in case something happens to your primary camera. I have had this happen to me in the past. Dropped my camera while jumping out of the vehicle to go out on a foot surveillance and discovered it was broken when I got back. Luckily, I had a backup camera and was ready to continue on with just a slight hiccup in my day. I would recommend to have a backup camera that is the same or very similar to your regular one. I have been doing this so long now that my backup was my last primary. And when I'm done and retiring my current primary, it will most likely become my backup. Okay, now that you have your cameras, you need something to hold them. I use a good standard tripod, but I usually use it with all three legs down and use it as a monopod. Some surveillance investigators prefer to have both a tripod and a monopod. The problem with using both, if you have the monopod on and you want to switch to tripod to shoot a long piece of video while stationary, you must change gear in the middle of your surveillance. Okay, there's at least one other camera that you need for proper surveillance, folks. That's a covert camera or a spy cam. Many PIs today just use their cell phone, and that is okay for many situations, but not all, to be sure. I use covert spy cams by Lawmate. I have multiple covert spy cams that I take with me on surveillance. A cell phone cam, a key fob cam, and a pen cam are my go-to covert cams. If you're getting started, these might be a little bit out of your budget, so your cell phone may be the way to start. But if you can work it into your budget, then these are very good. But please make sure that you just don't go on the internet and buy those cheap knockoff $10 spy cams from China. Okay, power is a must-have also to ensure that everything that you have stays charged up while you're out on the case. I use a DC to AC converter battery jumper box for this. The one I have has a built-in DC to AC power converter, a 12-volt power plug, and a USB plug. I try to plug all of my equipment into this when in use or if charging instead of using my vehicle's power. In the event my vehicle power does get low and I need to jump, I can use this to jump it too. Take it from somebody who knows. You will drain your battery one day while out on surveillance. This is a definite lifesaver. Food and water is of the utmost necessity to ensure you stay healthy and hydrated. I only take dry foods along with me, like nuts and fruit mixes, that kind of stuff, and of course I eat sparingly. I try to make sure what food I have has little to no sugar and is high in protein as well. I also keep a case of water in my vehicle, as well a case of Gatorades for those really hot days. You may start out thinking that you're going out on a 4 to 6 hour case, and it could end up being 12, 16 hours or more. So having a food supply with you is very important. Now, the most needed and least talked about equipment you need for surveillance, folks, is portable bathroom utilities. Yes, there you go. This is an absolute necessity for every surveillance investigator. You can't just break surveillance and run to the nearest gas station or fast food joint every time you have to go. If you do this, you will most assuredly run into Murphy's Law. If anything can go wrong, it will go wrong. You'll go back out on surveillance and find your subject is gone, or worse, not find out the subject is gone, but he has gone. There is nothing worse than sitting on a surveillance for 6, 8, 10 hours only to see your target, whom you thought was in his house all the time, come home from a day of shopping with his wife. How are you going to explain that one to your client? So, how do you take care of nature's calls while on surveillance? For guys, it's a little bit simpler. Remember those water bottles? Remember those Gatorade bottles? You can simply repurpose them, guys. Just please make sure you dispose of the waste properly. Ladies, I am no expert, so you're going to have to find ways on your own, but I have heard some ladies use a bedpan or other such utility. And guys, you may need something like a bedpan as well for other needs. There's one thing that I can guarantee you. You most definitely will lose subjects from time to time doing surveillance. There is no surefire way to guarantee you will never lose your target, but there are some things that you can do to give you the edge, to give you the advantage that will help make sure you maintain a visual on your subject during surveillance. No two surveillances are ever the same. Even if you're doing surveillance on a subject that you have worked before, there will be differences. Obviously, if you conduct surveillance on a subject more than once, you will start to see some patterns. You will gather new intel and have some new information for the next time. But even those things you can't guarantee will be the same. Treat each day, each round of surveillance as if it is a brand new case and a brand new day. Know your intel, but don't rely solely on your intel. Intelligence is the information that you have prior to going out on your surveillance. Things like the subject's vehicle description, known habits of the subject, driving patterns, etc. It is very important for you to know all that you can about your subject and their residence, the vehicles, and other things, but don't rely solely on that intel. When you arrive on scene, nothing may be as you thought it will be, and things may change rapidly as the case goes on. I had a case in a very rural town one time. The subject left the house and was followed about an hour where he went to a farm. And then he left driving a totally different vehicle and continued down the road the same direction that he was going prior. At first, this seemed very suspicious. Am I burned? Did he see me following him? Later, I discovered it was his vehicle. The farm belonged to the family, and he traded off vehicles there as he needed them. This time, he grabbed his pickup and went and purchased some lumber at a store in a nearby city. Then he took it back to his house. It made perfectly good sense once I figured it all out. But if I had relied solely on waiting for that one car to leave, relying solely on the intel I had, I would have never known that he was inside that pickup when I left. Prior to him leaving in the pickup, a female had left in the car that he arrived in. I had to make a split-second decision, but thankfully I had a zoomed-in camera on the farm, and I knew there was still a guy there that I thought was him. Had I followed the car, I would have ended up following his wife back to the house, and I may have never known that he was not inside the vehicle. Make a plan, but be ready to throw that plan out the window. You need to go in with a plan on how you will work the case, but many times the circumstances that arise during the surveillance make that plan completely obsolete. Having a plan going in is good, but it is only as useful and only as good as the investigation tracks with the plan. Be ready to write plan B, C, D, or Z if need be in every case. Set up for success. You need to know the neighborhood prior to going out to the surveillance. Where are possible places for you to park? What is the most likely departure route? Things like that. I always try to set up some distance away, maybe 4 or 5 houses from the subject's residence on the most likely exit route. When I started doing surveillance, I was much more aggressive. I always parked where I could clearly see the residence, sometimes directly across the street. However, this can create many issues when conducting mobile surveillance. First problem, if you can plainly see the residents, the subject can plainly see you when they leave. Secondly, if you're too close, you are more likely to get made or be seen by the subject when he leaves, because when he leaves the neighborhood, you're almost going to have to leave at the exact same split time that he does in order to keep up with him. Also, he or she may likely know their immediate neighbors much better than the people down the block. In the event a neighbor or the police talk to you, this activity is likely to be noticed by your subject if you are in close proximity. You need to know all avenues of departure. Get on the internet, look over the neighborhood very carefully. Where are the major arteries and what streets, alleys, roads lead to them? Where are the major shopping and business districts and how might the subject get to those? I usually either go out earlier than the scheduled start time or I go out the previous day if it's close by to observe neighborhood activity. What avenues do the neighbors take? Many times what your GPS tells you is the best route to a location is not the route that everyone that lives there will take. Remember, intel is good, but not to be relied on 100% of the time. The internet provides intel, not guarantees. I have had many cases where I went to a residence by the means of GPS instruction, only to see everyone in that neighborhood believes a totally different way. After following the subject, it makes sense. But if you do not know, it may seem like he is driving some weird route through the neighborhood to shake a tail. Highways versus city streets is also a good thing to keep in mind also. I live in a mid-sized city where most of us stick to the city arterials, but GPS always tries to get us on a highway. If you followed me to the grocery store, I might take 6 streets to drive 3 miles, and I could have taken 3 roads and driven faster, but I chose to drive local streets. I always sit in the front seat. I know everyone teaches you to sit in the back seat, and sometimes I still do if circumstances dictate it. But trying to hop up front, start your car, pull down any window coverings, and take off during a stakeout is a recipe to losing your subject almost every time. Or worse, a recipe to ensure you drive unsafe. Safety must always be your #1 priority, folks. Now, I know there are some folks out there that they're probably much more skilled at this than I am, but for me, it is always sit in the front seat when possible. You, as a professional investigator, have a higher level of requirement to maintain safety while you're out there. You know what you're doing. No one else does. And your license is not a license to be careless. It's a license for a professional. Don't let your brain get the best of you. It's hard sitting out there, freezing your brain, boiling your brain, sometimes doing both on the same day. You see everything. You see everybody. It's easy for the mind to start getting paranoid and think everyone is watching you. Everyone knows where you're at. When you are following your subject, he may make U-turns or go into weird neighborhoods, but it's usually for a reason. Don't let your head get to you. Sometimes they're just lost, or they missed a turn, or they're on the phone. It's easy, though, to let your mind convince you that you are made or burned. Just relax, breathe, pull back slightly if need be, but not so much that you lose them. Think about the other reasons they may have done what they just did. Maybe they were going to get a cup of coffee, then realized that they didn't have time or didn't have money with them. They might have thought that they forgot something, and then they suddenly found it. I had a case where a guy left his house, pulled into the driveway for a McDonald's one morning, went towards the drive-thru, then suddenly went around the backside of the building. He went towards a ranch supply store in the rear. I thought, okay, he's just taking a shortcut there. He got to the end of the parking area in front of that ranch store. He flipped a quick U, drove right past me and the other investigator working with me. We were like, oh my goodness, we have been totally burned. We did get turned around. We somehow caught back up to him. Then he drove back country roads into the nearest city, drove clear across city, then went to a car wash, washed and cleaned out his pickup truck. Then he went to a parking lot by a Starbucks and waited inside his truck for almost 30 minutes. Then he went into a nearby restaurant with another man. Then he left and went all the way back home, 20 miles away. Well, we then saw this other man arrive at his house with another truck. Turns out his truck was a company truck. The other guy was swapping trucks with him. Lo and behold, when I left for the day, I drove to that driveway by the farm supply store where he flipped that sudden U-turn and drove past us. At the end of that driveway was a car wash that was out of order. Once we knew all the facts, it all made sense. Had we let our minds get in the way, we would have lost him and never knew that he traded vehicles, which was new intel for the next day's surveillance. Stay close during the follow. When I started, I often tried to keep 1 or 2 vehicles between myself and the subject. I found, though, over time that this led to more lost follows. I have learned to stay close, not bumper to bumper, but close enough that I don't get caught at a red light if they go through a yellow light. Just drive normal. I also will let some distance between us grow in between stoplights if the lights are a good distance apart, but then close the gap as we get closer to the next light. This works well in most cases, but if they are speed demons gunning it after each green and you let too much space get between you and your subject, you will have to go even faster to catch up with them, and that could lead to a more dangerous situation. Hang on until you get to the first place they're going. It always seems like after you get to that first place they are going, everything else goes smoother after that. If they haven't made you by then, there's little chance that they will figure it out. Usually. Obviously not always, but usually Most people go to 1 to 3 places, then back home. Making it to the first stop is one step closer to them getting back home. And now you know a little more about them and their driving habits. Pay attention to the driving habits. Do they use turn signals? Do they signal suddenly or for long periods of time? Do they brake quickly? Do they drive erratic or fast? Are there notable things about the rear of their vehicle? Brake light shape, bumper or window stickers, tail light out, things like that. Anything to help you in future follows. You can gain a lot of intel on that first leg of the first tail. So pay attention to everything. Ease up once they're headed home. If you know that they're going home, they're heading on a route, take them right to the residence, you can usually ease up a little bit. If they went and got a ton of groceries, they probably are not going to be driving all over town with the groceries in the car. They will want to get home, so you can ease up a little bit on the following. During this time, run through in your mind potential places that you can park when you get to the residence, where you can safely get video without the subject seeing you. Down the street a little bit, under a shady tree, someplace like that. This will allow you to get some video as they unload the groceries and things like that, which is very important if it is a personal injury or a workers' comp case that you're working at the time. I don't care how long you've been doing this, you're going to make mistakes. I make mistakes. Or more appropriately, you will always find opportunities to learn better ways to do things. When I started doing surveillance, I knew nothing. Literally, I knew nothing. I had seen some things on TV and read some things in books, but I really knew nothing about the real world of surveillance. Over many years, I've had a lot of opportunities to learn new ways to do things, and I always look at mistakes as new learning opportunities. Now, I'm sure if you have been doing surveillance for a while, you have had people approach you on many occasions asking what you are doing in the neighborhood. I know I've had it happen to me a lot, and I'm sure it's going to happen again in the future. Now, having a great pretext for this type of situation is vital. My first surveillance pretext method that I will share is when I need to confirm or prove that my subject is home. Many times your client will request that you conduct a door knock to see if the subject is there. Before you jump out of your car and run down the road, you need to ensure it is legal to do that door knock. In Colorado, I know if the subject is represented by an attorney, you cannot have any contact with the subject. There are no exceptions to this rule, and you need to understand what the laws are regarding this in your state. Then I use this little trick to help me with my door knock. I get a photo of a cute little puppy. I put it on my phone, and then when I do the door knock, I simply state something like, "Sorry to bother you, our puppy got loose, and we're trying to find him. Have you seen him anywhere?" And you show them the picture of the puppy. Now make sure that photo is downloaded on your phone. You don't want to be showing them the picture from an internet search, then you accidentally click something and they see it's just a search screen. You also want the picture to be of not a common dog, or you can even use a cat if that works better for you. Just make sure that it's a unique one so it is not very likely that they saw that dog or that cat anywhere. You also want to make sure you do this in a manner that appears real. Don't just get out of your car down the street, walk right up to the subject residence, do the door knock, then walk right back to your car. This is a surefire way to get burned. Even if the subject doesn't answer the door, he might be home and just watching you on his camera or out a window. Also, it needs to look real to the neighbors. I will usually park around the corner down the block, then come walking up the street and go to each house, at least 3 to 4 houses prior to getting to the subject house. Then after I conduct the door knock at the subject house, I continue the same direction going to the next 3 to 4 houses using the same pretext at each house. Now you can do the same thing if your subject is represented by legal counsel too. Just don't go to your subject's house. Say something to the neighbors on each side like, "Maybe the folks next door have seen our dog. Do you know if they're home?" Sometimes I can get some good information from the neighbors, like things like when the subject goes to work, where they work, when they leave their house, what kind of a car they drive, things like that. Sometimes when I do this, then I'll walk across the street to avoid going to my subject house, go to a few houses there, and then come back across and head to my car. Another great door knock pretext you can use in the same manner is as a prospective home buyer. This works great if there's a house in the neighborhood for sale. You can grab a brochure out of one of those little realtor boxes, and you go door to door asking people about the neighbors, the neighborhoods, the schools, things like that. Now let's explore those times when you just can't sit in a neighborhood and hide in your car while on surveillance. There are many reasons this might happen, like you roll into the neighborhood in the middle of the afternoon, or you just got back from following your subject and there are people outside in the neighborhood. This is not the time to throw up your sunscreen and your blackouts and hop in the back seat. For the nosy neighbor pretext, I make sure I always have some papers with me, usually the cover sheet for my surveillance. It's turned upside down on the passenger seat of my car. Then if a neighbor approaches me, I simply state, I'm a process server, I have some papers right here, and I'm waiting for somebody down the street. That almost always satisfies them. And if you have to come back the next day or a few days later and they see you, they know, or at least they think they know, why you're there. I had a case one time where I used this when an elderly lady came to see why I kept parking in front of her house. On my second day sitting in my car during that hot summer, this lady came out. She offered me a cold soda, some cookies, and even told me that I could go park in her driveway, which was shaded. There are other similar guises you can use too. Things like a cell phone signal analyst. And you can ask the people that come up to you if they've noticed any drop service lately. Or you're just doing traffic counts. You ever do much surveillance out in the country, you know what a pain this can be. You can't just park on the side of the dirt road across the street from your subject's house. I will usually try to find a vantage point down the road a little bit, and I use a traffic survey guide. I have an orange magnetic sign, which I had made at Vistaprint, that simply says in black letters, traffic survey. I also have an orange light I can stick on top of my surveillance vehicle, and an orange vest along with a hard hat and a clipboard. This, guys, if done properly, does all the work for you. Seldom does anyone ever stop, or if they do, they just want to know if the road is going to be worked on, and then I simply say, I don't know, they just send me out here to survey the traffic. Sometimes while on surveillance and the neighbors notice me, I just tell them who I am, and that resolves it completely. Sorry to bother you, ma'am. I am a licensed private investigator. I can't divulge the details of why I'm here, but rest assured it has nothing to do with you or anyone in your house. If you wish, you can call the police. They are aware of my presence here today. Let's discuss what to do when the police do roll up in the middle of your surveillance. First, you need to decide, is it just a regular neighborhood patrol, or is it a call for a suspicious vehicle or a suspicious person? Many times while out on surveillance, especially in smaller towns, I will see police multiple times during the day. Police departments in those smaller towns many times require frequent neighborhood drive-thrus. I know one town here in Colorado that requires every street to be driven once an hour unless officers are on a call. When you see the patrol car, just keep an eye on them and see what they are doing. If you're visible to them, then I would suggest doing a quick hand wave as they pass by. Most times, if it's just a regular patrol, they're just going to wave and drive right on by. Any suspicious neighbors that see this will assume that the police know you and that you don't pose a threat to them. Now, usually if this happens to me after I have made the hand wave to the officer, I will usually then call myself into dispatch, code 5 on surveillance, and let them know where I am, my vehicle description, my plate number, my cell phone number in case they need to reach me, and how long I plan to be in the area. This way, when that officer drives back by in an hour or two, he knows why I'm still sitting there in my car. Now, if you're hunkered down, you're blacked out in your car, then just let them pass. If it's a routine patrol, they will be in and out fairly quickly. If they are on a call for a suspicious vehicle or a suspicious person, you will know soon enough, as this is what you're probably going to see in your rear view. Now, what should you do if they park down the street from you? First thing you should do is just wait it out. See what they're doing. They may just be on a call down the street, or perhaps they live on the street and they're just coming home from their shift, or they know somebody who lives on the street. If they start moving towards you slowly in their vehicle, then you might be the subject of their interest in the neighborhood. Keep an eye on things, but don't do anything alarming. So now the officer has pulled in behind you. Lights are on, approaching your vehicle with one hand on his weapon, the other on his radio. What should you do? As with all traffic stops, keep your hands visible. Roll down your window, make eye contact in your mirror with the officer if possible. Do not get out of your vehicle. Do not start going off on the officer about how he has ruined your surveillance or given the riot act about your rights to sit in a public space on a public roadway. This will just make things worse, folks. My recommendation is to always be ready for their inquiry. They will usually tell you they noticed you or they got a call about a suspicious vehicle or something like that and ask you what you're doing. I always tell the truth when dealing with the police. I don't always give the details, but I will say something to the effect of, "Sorry to be a bother, officer. I'm a private investigator. I'm conducting some surveillance on a subject down the road, and I should be done about 4 o'clock this afternoon." Then when they ask to see your ID, I always give them my driver's license, my registration, my insurance, my PI license, as well as a business card. If the officer asks who I am watching, I will say something like, "Due to client confidentiality, I cannot give out that information." That will usually suffice. Then the officer will usually go back, run you real quick for wants and warrants, and then get out of your way. Sometimes they'll say something like, "You should call yourself in when you're doing surveillance." You can then inquire as to what number you should call, and then on future surveillances in the area, you can call yourself in. Now, what do you do if they ask you to step out of the car? Well, this has never happened to me in over 1,000 surveillances, but I would probably get out of my car. You have to keep in mind the officer doesn't know you at all. They have no reason to believe your story, and they may consider you a credible threat to the neighborhood or to him or herself. All of this can be prevented to a point if you first call yourself into dispatch when you initiate surveillance. Keep in mind, though, just because you call yourself in does not mean if a suspicious neighbor sees you and calls 911, the police won't come to check things out. In fact, in most jurisdictions, they require an officer go out to an area for all 911 calls. If you have called in, however, and they have your cell phone number, they may call you first to inquire as to your presence and let you know someone has called in and that they have to come check it out. When this has happened to me in the past, I have even had officers that ask me if I wanted to meet them off scene so I don't blow my cover. Now, the easiest answer to the big question, when should I call myself into dispatch for surveillance, is it all depends, folks. There is no surefire answer, but I will go over some of my thoughts of when I do and when I don't call in Code 5. If I am working a rural case, and I do a lot of rural cases, I almost always call myself in to county dispatch. I don't call the local police station, I just call dispatch. Small town and rural county surveillance are the ones I find most likely to have someone call in a suspicious vehicle. Now, some people will argue that if you do that in smaller areas, you could be talking to the subject's sister or cousin or a friend that works in dispatch, or they may have friends or family that are in law enforcement in the area. While this is true, I have never, to my knowledge, had this happen on any of my rural cases. I do know if you try to do city surveillance in small towns or out in the country, you will get burned more often than not. If I am working a mid to large size city, it really depends on the neighborhood. If it's a large apartment complex, I'm less likely to call myself in. If I'm working in a normal family neighborhood, but able to sit in an industrial area or a shopping area or a nearby apartment complex, I probably won't call myself in. If I'm working in a very busy, crowded family neighborhood, I'm most likely going to call myself in when I start surveillance. As well, if I'm in an upscale neighborhood, I'm going to call myself in too. It will also depend on the time of day that you're starting. If it's 5 a.m., I'm not likely to call myself in right away. I may wait and see if I get activity on my subject. If not, then I might call myself in later, depending on the circumstances. If I'm starting at 10 o'clock in the morning or in the middle of the afternoon in a residential neighborhood, I'm probably going to call myself in. As you can see, there are a lot of variables that go into answering the question. Use common sense, folks, as well. Use your gut feel.